Hey guys, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. It is a typical winter day today, even though it looks really nice when you're in the inside, because outside you see the sun poking through every now and then, but it is very windy and it's a wind coming straight from the Baltic Sea, which means it is an Arctic wind. And that is one of those days where you just want to stay inside, make it comfy, and that is exactly what I did. I have a fire going on in the fireplace, just had a nice hot cup of tea, and I'm ready to do a project with you that I was longing to do for quite a while. So when it comes to my style of gardening, I always try and attract wildlife to the garden. And it could be with the way in how I plant things. So I always try to have something in flower in the garden. So if a bee might wake up on a warm winter day, it will find a hellebore or crocus or snowdrop, something in flower. But I also have a lot of shrubs that do produce berries for the flying friends of the garden. But we're at the time of the year where most of those berries are gone now, a lot of the rose hips are gone, and we have freezing temperatures, which means now is a perfect time to get in there and do some additional feeding for the birds. And this is exactly what I love to do, and this is what I want to share with you in today's video. There are different kind of ways on how you can do it. Like I'll do 3 different ways and I will share them with you. But before I'll do it, I just want to flip the phone and just talk you through all the ingredients that I use for making any kind of bird food. So I hope you're excited about today's video. I've already prepared all the ingredients that I want to use for the bird food making today, but before I would talk you through this and I start, I just want to put emphasis on one thing that you need to make sure is you need to know what kind of birds do you actually have in your garden. So get there and observe whatever you have. I've done it over the past year, so I know what we're having in the garden in the winter time. So we've got big amounts of grey tits, we've got blue tits, we've got occasionally blackbirds, not too often though. We've got one red robin, only one. And that has to do because red robins have a territory, and that normally is the size of an average garden. So this is why most of the time you only get to see one of those in your own garden and not 2. Then we've also got some bigger birds here. We've got woodpeckers, and I see them so often working their way through the bark on the walnut trees. And occasionally I see jaybirds, also every now and then. But those are the ones that I see most likely in our garden here. So once you know what kind of birds you have in your garden, you need to know what kind of food do the birds actually need, because there are those kind of birds that feed on a vegetarian diet. They eat like nuts and grains and berries and all those kind of things, but then there are also those that feed on protein. So they require like worms or bugs, mosquitoes, whatever they can find. I went to the pet shop because I wanted to buy some dried worms, but they were sold out. Like you can buy them in the pet shop, but it is what it is. So today I can only cater for the vegetarian birds of the garden. So I'll have an eye on the pet shop and see if the worms are going to be back in stock, and then I will do a second round basically of making bird food for the other birds as well. So what I have is, the first one is quite obvious because when you buy any kind of bird food, this is in pretty much all of the mixes. These are sunflowers. These are kind of like big seeds though. And I always buy the ones that are still in the shell, because here most of the energy is still, and all the goodness is still inside the actual sunflower. So you can also buy those that are not sitting in the shell anymore, because then you don't have to deal with the mess. But I don't mind, because this breaks down. It's kind of like compost almost at one point for your garden. If you grow your own sunflowers, even better, because then you can harvest them and use them. And I think this is something that I might want to do for next year. So far I've never done it, but I think it's a smart way of having organic sunflower seeds grown in your own garden. How fun is that? Then I'm using 2 different varieties of nuts. The first one, that is a native nut for here. It grows in our garden, even we've got 2 trees, so I'm using walnuts. And they have a really nice and good size. And the second one are actually not native here, but I still had it back, so I thought I could just incorporate them. So I got pecan nuts as well. And I was talking about like different birds and different sizes of birds. So obviously you have a jaybird, which is quite big, and then you have a blue tit, which is a really cute tiny bird. So a jaybird easily can fly in and just like take one of these nuts, take it to its nest or wherever, and just eat it. But a tiny bluebird can't possibly do this or even deal with a walnut this size. So what I need to do is chop up the nuts to make sure that I can cater for all different sizes of birds, and especially since we have so many grey tits and blue tits, this is what I really need to do, is to make sure that the nuts are chopped up for the right size for those tinier birds. Last ingredient that I'm going to use are oats, because a lot of birds also feed on grains, like on spelt, on oats, whatever. So I've got basically what I eat for my breakfast. This is my oatmeal, whole grains, and they work quite well in the mix in one of the recipes that I will do, because they kind of like, they're a little mushy at one point. They hold everything together almost like a glue, which is perfect. And that brings me to how I do it. And the first way on how I do it is I mix these things together and then I put them in a little mold. And I just use just a normal muffin tin basically, because that works ideal, has a perfect size. But I need to bring all these things together now, because if I just put it in here, it all falls out obviously, and you need to have some sort of grease or fat, and I use coconut fat because it gets really hard again, it's very easy to deal with and to work with, and for obvious reasons I'm not using palm oil or palm fat or anything. Some people also use like grease from animals like pork or beef. I just don't really like to do it because, I mean, obviously a bird here would never feed a coconut, but I also think it's kind of like weird to give a bird like beef fat or something, but that is probably more a personal thing. Having that said, it's not bad though. You can do it and a lot of people do it. So this is just more of a personal thing. So how this works actually with these little tins, you can use whatever form you have. You can honestly use your cereal bowl if you want, if it's a small one obviously. But what I want to do is I mix everything together, chop up the nuts, heat up the coconut fat, put everything in the pot where the fat is in. I'm going to show you in a second how that works. And then I'm going to put it here into the tin. But then I want to have something so I can hang it actually on the tree, and I will use straw because I just like to use with natural materials, because if this flies off the tree or whatever, I don't want to use plastic, then this can still degrade, break down, do goodness to the soil. So this is why I always like to use natural materials. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some strings, braid them or do something like that, put it in here, and then when my mixture is ready, heated up everything, I can just come in, fill it, and then it can just cool off for a couple of hours, and then I can just pop it out and put it on a tree. So this is a really lovely way of doing it. And this is just the first way of doing it. There's two other ways on how I want to show you what you can do as well. Then obviously you can always feed your birds in a feeder. And most of the time these feeders look like little cute houses, and I have one of those as well, obviously. But when it comes to these houses, there are a lot of them that are actually looking really nice and pleasing, but they're not so good when you think about it. And I can give you a prime example. Like when I was a child, my dad actually built one of those. Beautiful, really big. He even made little shingles for the roof and everything. It looked so cute, but the base was kind of like a big base on a pillar, and you would just pour all the food inside, so the birds would fly in, and then they would stand and sit on their own food and also do their number two business on their own food, which is obviously not good because, well, then you have poo in the food, and this is really not what you want to have. So this is why I bought one of these feeders here, and they are perfect for that, because what happens is you can just open up the roof like this, fill your food in, and then close it off again, and then you can actually even see how much food is always in there, which is really good. And it just falls down into this little trench that is all the way down here on both sides, and then you have this little rim here. So when the birds fly in, they would sit here on the rim, they could eat out of the trench while their back is hanging outside. And when they do their number two business, nothing ends up in the food. So if you do plan on buying one of the little house thingies, this is actually the one that I would definitely recommend, because they are very good and your birds stay healthy and fit and don't need to eat the poo from the previous bird that was feeding. So what I want to do now first is actually just prepare everything that I need to prepare, like the little straw thing is here. So this here, going to chop up the nuts and everything, heat it up, fill it in there. And after I've done that, I'm just going to show you two different more methods on how you can make your birds happy with food. I used most of the food that I prepared and put it into the muffin tin and put it now on the outside because obviously it is quite cool outside and the fat is going to harden off outside, and you could tell how I've done it, I think, because now you got the string, so when everything is like hard together you could just take it out with a string and put it straight on the tree. This is just a very easy way of doing it, and you don't need any plastic or anything to hold it together. You could also tell that I prepared something different, and this is already waiting here and sitting here. This is something that my grandparents did with me when I was a child. I think this is just a nice thing to do with your kids or grandkids, or I don't know, if you're watching Neighbors' Kids or whatever on a cold winter day. You could craft a little something and also explain them like how wildlife works, and this is going to be another feeder basically. So when you do something like this and your kids are involved and you put it outside, I think for children it's always lovely to watch it. And when they're involved in a little project like this, I feel like the entire thing of nature is not so abstract for kids sometimes anymore. So what I basically do is I just had like one of our timbers that I would normally use for the fireplace, a quite thin one. So I put holes in there. So the top one here obviously, so I could put another string there so I can hang it onto a tree, and then two more. So I have one in the middle where I put a bamboo kind so birds can fly in and sit on here basically. So I'm just fixing it. And then I had like one of the walnut tree branches that came down, one of the dead ones, so I tied that one in quite well as well. And what I want to do with this one here actually is quite easy. I still have a little bit of the food left here, and all you do now is you come in. I take this one out again because it needs to sit flat, because otherwise it's just going to fall off. Mix it all well together so that there is coconut fat everywhere around it, and then you just take it and just put it onto the wooden board all the way from the top to the bottom, and it's going to stick there, and then the birds can fly in and feed on it. And then you have the different areas where they can sit on, they can take something, sit here. So it's a really lovely thing to do. I'm going to just finish it off in a second, but one more thing that I want to show you how you can also feed your birds is really nice, and especially if you have evergreens in your garden, you could use pine cones. And this is when the pecan nuts kick in, because what you can do is like you take a pecan nut, dip it in a little bit of the grease basically, a little bit of the coconut fat, and then you just stick it in between the gaps from the pine cone basically. You don't really need to have the grease sometimes, but I think it's a little better because it works as a glue when it dries off, and then it stays in a little bit easier and it doesn't fall out so easily. So you can just work your way around it actually, and then it looks really nice. And this is good for bigger birds. So this is like something for your jaybird, for example. So they could fly in and just take out what they want. I'll just show you up close how it looks actually. So this is kind of like what you would do. Just work your way around the pine cone and put the nuts in there everywhere. So yeah, this is actually what I'm going to do now. Finish off these two things and put a mixture of food into my birdhouse that I also have. This is everything I'm going to do today, and then tomorrow when everything is hardened off and ready, I'm going to go outside with you and put it in the trees, and hopefully I can also show you some birds that are feeding on them, fingers crossed. That is it for today's project. I put the bird food everywhere in the garden, like in different areas. And it was yesterday one of those typical days. I kind of started with this and I thought, oh, this is going to be a quick, fun project. In the end, I got distracted with something. Then it was dark outside again. But yeah, it was really lovely doing it. I really enjoyed doing this little thingy, actually. Well, you know what I'm talking about, that little thingy there with a wooden board where the birds can sit on and just really put the bird food on the side. And yeah, I'm really excited to see the birds flying in. From my experience, it always takes like about 2-3 hours before the birds now really discover it, and then they really come in a swarm and just smother it. So I'm hoping that at one point I might need to be able to take a little video for you. Let's see. I'm not really good in taking videos of like animals. Like Alfie, that is a fluke, I think, because she's like quite photogenic. Well, not quite. She's really photogenic, let's face it. So I don't really need to do a lot there. And I think she's quite posing on top of it. She really enjoys to have a photo moment. Two last things I just want to mention before I say bye to you is, because I'm not sure if I mentioned it before, when you want to do your own bird food, there's one thing you really need to make sure is that whatever ingredient you use, nothing should be seasoned. So no salted nuts or anything like that. That is really important. The second thing that I want to mention is like wherever you put your bird food, obviously things will fall down on the ground, and try and make sure that you put it in an area where when it falls down that cats, for example, cannot hide somewhere around it well and might not be able to attack the bird so easily. So I've had good experience here in these areas because this is where I always put it just from my experience. But these are the only two things that I want to mention. One, maybe last quick thing that I just want to say is I don't do it today now because the ground isn't frozen today, but in 2-3 days we're really going to expect night frost again. So what I do sometimes is like I chop up some apples as well into smaller pieces, and then I just put them really in the middle of the lawn because then birds would fly in and just really take those tiny pieces of the apple very happily as well. So I hope you had fun with today's project, you enjoyed it. Maybe I could inspire you making your own bird food. It's always a good thing to bring wildlife into your garden. I'd be very happy though to welcome you in my garden very soon again, and until then, have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.